My name is Malcolm Butterfield. I'm an independent professional consultant. I will be your moderator and chairman this evening for the town hall meeting. I would like to take an opportunity to welcome everyone here this evening. The purpose of the evening is for the Minister of Finance, Bob Richards, to make a presentation, a 30-minute presentation. He's going to give some highlights of the economy and the finances of the country. He's going to move then on to the recommendations that have been accepted by the government coming out of the SAGE report. And the final part of his presentation will deal with the implementation, the execution, and the collaboration process. It is important that we lay out some protocol and logistical issues this evening. Following the Minister's presentation, the floor will be open for questions. I'm asking that you keep your questions brief. I will also be referencing that there will be roaming mics, this mic and another mic, and the staff that we have here in attendance will bring the mic to you to help you so everyone can hear your questions. The meeting this evening will go until 8 p.m. Kindly note that this evening, given the role that I have, I will not be expressing my views and opinions, but I look forward to receiving your questions, and hopefully the Minister will be here to answer them this evening. At this point, if there are no further questions or other questions, hopefully you can hear me much better than before. And I'm asking you to certainly bring your questions, and let's have a productive, interactive dialogue this evening to achieve some progress on the issues that I talked about. It gives me great pleasure at this time to introduce and present the Minister of Finance, E.T. Bob Richards. Bob.
Thank you very much, Malcolm. I hope everyone can hear. I know that the acoustics aren't that great, but I'd be grateful if everyone, at least, I have a number of slides and a slide deck I'd like to present to you so that we can get some clarity on the issues that faced Bermuda, and we'll talk about what we are going to do about the SAGE report, and then I look forward to your questions. First of all, let me say what a great thrill it is to be here and to have so many folks here. It just goes to show you that everybody realizes that we have some very serious challenges facing our island and facing all of us. Well, just by way of introduction, let me just say this, that I'm representing the government. We have some government ministers here and some of my senior technical officers, head of the civil service as well, representing government. But government does not exist on its own. Matter of fact, government does not exist without the people. In a democracy, I see this may be a long night.
Stand by and speak over here. Stand by here.
In a democracy, ladies and gentlemen, government is an extension of the people and is directly connected to them. Whether we like it or not, you are us and we are you. The financial difficulties of the government are not separate and apart from you or me in our own personal lives. there is a direct and unbreakable tie between government and our personal lives everywhere you look, because everything costs money. Will there be enough money to provide quality care if we get sick? Will there be enough money so that the police can keep us safe? Will there be enough money to educate little Jenny or Johnny? Will there be enough money to pay for Dad's pension that was promised to him when he retires? Therefore, when I describe the financial challenges that the government faces, it's not just about some abstract thing up there on Parliament Hill. It's a personal problem for every man, woman, and child in this wonderful place we call Bermuda. So, this is not an issue of us and them. It's an issue of us. It's an issue of us and us. Now, I have a presentation which I hope that you can all see, and I hope that you can all hear me as I talk to it. This is sort of an outline of what we're going to do this evening, why we are here, the SAGE Commission submission, high-level policy considerations, implementation framework, union and private sector collaboration, and then we'll have your questions. Why are we here tonight? We are here tonight because of the state of public sector finances. That's why we're here tonight. Otherwise, there would be no SAGE Commission, there would be no meeting here tonight. Now, I want you to think about this, that the state of public sector finances is a victim and a cause of a fuel shortage. When the economy has fuel, these are bars are GDP, when the economy has fuel, the economy soars. And when it doesn't have fuel, it loses altitude. Now, when there's no fuel, there is no growth. So you might ask, what is the fuel that I'm talking about? What is this fuel? The fuel, ladies and gentlemen, is capital from abroad. I'll tell you something. There's a lot of people in this room, but we all have one thing in common, if nothing else. Because every person in this room, every person out there in Bermuda, every cent that we have in our pockets, all comes from the same place. The same place. It comes from abroad. Doesn't come from us, it comes from abroad. Now, this capital from abroad comes in two forms. It comes from direct capital investment. So if somebody is building a hotel or a bridge or an airport, that's direct capital investment from overseas. It comes in that form, and it also comes in the form of foreigners living in Bermuda or visiting Bermuda. Those are the only two sources of the fuel that fuel our economy. Only two. Now, government is a victim of the fuel shortage. This is a bar chart of government revenues, and you see that the graph has a very similar shape to GDP. So government's revenue stream is very strongly correlated and connected to the economy itself. If the economy itself does well, government revenues do well. If the economy does poorly, our revenues go down. So government is a victim of the fuel shortage because the government continues to be asked to provide services In fact, we have to provide more services when the economy is weak, more financial assistance, and as we've lost a number of people living in Bermuda, the pension funds come under more stress. So we have all of these stresses on us in a time of a fuel shortage or capital shortage, but we're still required to provide these services. So government is a victim of a shortage of capital. I know this graph is a bit difficult to explain, but I want to try, because government is also a victim, a source of the shortage. When government manages its accounts badly, it affects money coming into Bermuda. All investors look at the world this way. If they invest in a country, the safest investment in that country will be the government. All other investments are considered to be less safe than that. Bermuda's the same way. So you see here, if the government's risk level is here, it will demand a very small return. And all other investments in Bermuda are like that. But if the government manages its affairs poorly, then investors will demand a higher return. But not just from the government, for all other projects in Bermuda too. So if the government performs poorly, then it makes it more difficult for us to get investment capital in Bermuda to build new hotels and to do other things that we want to do to create jobs in this place. So it is essential for government to manage its affairs properly if we want to get people back to work in Bermuda. This next chart is a debt chart, which I think most of you have seen, and you already know that debt has ramped up very dramatically over the years. We seem to be trying to get it under control in the next few years, but it is a big problem. And as you'll see, the problem is not so much the debt, but the servicing of the debt. Now, this is one that I think we all need to pay close attention to. This is a chart of government revenues minus government expenses. And you'll see here that in 2005, 6, 7, and 8, government revenues were greater than expenses, and we had a surplus. After that, government revenues were less than expenses, and the government has been running a deficit ever since. And this is what's referred to as the government deficit. And the way this works, folks, is simple. If we continue to run a deficit, we continue to accumulate debt. And when we continue to accumulate debt, we continue to have to pay more money in interest, etc. And we'll get to that in a moment. But this is key, because we have to correct this imbalance here. We cannot keep having financial years where revenues are not covering our expenses. There's no free lunches in Bermuda, folks. We're not like the United States that can print money. We're not like the United States that can print money and then spend it. We have to earn every dollar to spend our money. So the government deficit is key. Now, the next chart is a chart of government expenses before we pay our debt service. And you see that the, you see that government expenses have in fact decreased marginally in the last 3 years. I guess the question that we have to ask ourselves, is this improvement in spending, or this control of spending, is it enough to make a difference to that chart there? Is it enough to start to correct the deficit? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Let's look at the number of employees for government. This is an accurate number of government employees, and you see that since the high of 2010, the trend is down. So again, we have to ask the question, is this enough to make a difference to the government deficit? And we look at here, we're trying to compare the government revenues to the number of people that work for government. And you see, I think the best way we can describe this chart is that there's no real trend at all. So in spite of the fact that government employees, number of government employees has declined and government expenses have gone down, it really hasn't made much of a difference compared to the revenues. That's because the revenues have gone down too. So it's almost as though we're treading water here. Now, you can't hear me? Okay. Now, this is, if you follow government budget debates, you will recognize this chart. It's a chart of how government expenditures are divvied up into pretty big sections. You see this section called grants and contributions represents 26% of government spending. Is that better? Okay, sorry about that. You'll see that insofar as in this area, you have grants to the King Edward Hospital, grants to Maui, and financial assistance, all in there, right? The biggest segment, of course, is salaries and wages, represents 43% of government spending, and then we have a lot of smaller sectors here, professional services, some of which is consultants, that's infamous consultants. We have energy, we have materials and supplies, we have all other expenses here, and we have debt service, which represents 14.6% of total expenses. Ladies and gentlemen, in this financial year, it will cost $161.4 million to your government to service its debt. $161 million. And that's $13.4 million a month just to service the debt. And I have to tell you this. Many of people in Bermuda have mortgages, and where you pay your mortgage payment every month, some of it's interest, some of it's principal. But I bet none of you in this room have to go and put that mortgage payment on your credit card. In other words, you have to borrow money to pay your debt service. Now, that is what your government has to do. It has to borrow money to keep its debt service, because that debt service has to be paid before everything else. Before $1 of salaries to government employees is paid, we've got to pay debt service. Before $1 is paid to the hospital to take care of sick people, we have to pay debt service. Before $1 is paid for police to keep us safe, we have to pay debt service. And if this debt service grows, it will eventually squeeze out these other things. Because if we don't pay that debt service, then the Bermuda government will be broke. That's the definition of broke. Definition of broke is that you can't pay your debt service. So the servicing of the debt is key to the survival of the government, and the survival of the government and its ability to pay government employees, to pay government pensions, and all the other things that government does will be impossible if we don't control this thing here, debt service. So you might say, well, how that might not be easy, it might be difficult. What is it? How difficult is it? Well, this is the chart, ladies and gentlemen, of the growth in debt service. It's scary. There's a very scary chart. You see how rapidly the amount that we pay in debt service is. What this means to us is that the present state of government finances is totally unsustainable. You've heard me say this, and I'll say it again. The status quo is not an option because of this thing right here. If this thing keeps growing, if we do nothing, I guarantee you that one day will come soon that the Bermuda government will not be able to pay its debts and debt service, and people will suffer. They will suffer. Okay. So this is why we're here tonight. This is why we're here. There is an urgent need to do the two things: to grow the economy, thereby increasing government revenues, and to constrain and reduce government spending. And one of our efforts to constrain and reduce government spending is the work that the SAGE Commission did and the public service reform. That's the part of the component of our strategy to constrain and reduce government spending. So let us move on to the work that the SAGE Commission did. They divided their report into 5 sections: the performance, the critical paradigm shift, streamline government, create a more responsive government, measurements and metrics, the era of accountability, privatization, outsourcing, the right services for the right price, and pensions and pre-retirement, securing our future. The SAGE Commission produced over 200 recommendations, and one of the things that government has had to wrestle with over the ensuing months was to try to condense the 200 recommendations into a set of policy decisions that was manageable, because 200 is just not manageable. And we can't even talk to you as Bermudians about 200 recommendations because it's just too many to manage. So our technical officers worked hard to condense those 200 recommendations into 16 high-level policy decisions that will influence public service reform. So let's go with some of these recommendations, high-level policy decisions that the government is committed to do. The government accepts the recommendations to modify the leadership structure, evaluation methodology, and contracts for the civil service executive. And that is going to involve amendments to the legislation and regulations that govern the Public Service Commission. Also, SAGE recommended to formalize the succession planning. We've accepted that. And also to amend the Ministerial Code of Conduct. We've accepted the recommendations to do that. Also in this same section, government agrees to retain individuals independent of the unions to negotiate and harmonize union agreements. 5, to reform its human resource policy and operating structure to include performance, accountability, and all other human resource policies. The next section that we're dealing with, the SAGE, is to create a more responsive government. And the government accepts the recommendations to realign, merge, amalgamate, and/or discontinue certain departments and programs, to expand the digital record keeping, and other digital services. What the government has not accepted is a couple of things that the SAGE Commission recommended that we decided that we are not going to go forward with. And that they had recommended that we amend the Bermuda Constitution to realign Bermuda's legislative infrastructure. We've decided not to do that. That was unnecessary, too complex, and time-consuming. We've also decided not to mandate joint select committees of the House of Legislature to monitor activities of ministers. Not that joint select committees are a bad idea, but they will cause more complexity, more expense, and more bureaucracy, and we're trying to reduce that. So the Parliament at any time can form joint select committees, and that power of Parliament is still there. But what we decided we're not going to do is to mandate another layer of bureaucracy to get things. It's hard enough to get things done in government, and this will make it more difficult. Measurements and metrics. The government accepts the recommendation to modify its approach to reporting its goals, objectives, and results. Also, to strengthen budgetary planning and control systems to increase compliance and accountability. Privatization and outsourcing the right services for the right price. The government accepts the recommendation to establish an efficiency reform authority to review, evaluate, analyze the operations of public authorities for the purpose of privatization, mutualization, outsourcing. Note it says to review, evaluate, and analyze. It does not say to decide. That still gets done by cabinet. 2, to produce a property asset management plan and to dispose of unused assets to help reduce the deficit. 3, to cause its management and consultancy service unit to review duplicate functions across government. That's one of the things that the Efficiency Reform Authority will look into. The next section is pensions and other benefits. The government accepts the recommendation to review the public sector pensions and benefits framework to ensure the sustainability of the public sector funds. The contributory fund, which as you know is what backs social insurance, the public service superannuation fund, which is civil service pension fund, and the ministers and members of the legislature fund, which is the fund for MPs and senators. And also to review the GEHI health insurance system in a manner to help it be more responsible and fair to plan members and to Bermuda taxpayers. Save your jobs. Yeah, we're trying to do that here. Deficit reduction. Believe me, we're trying to do that here. And I can tell you something, ladies and gentlemen, I can tell you something, that I have my technical officers here. They have pencil and pad, and if we have any good ideas that we haven't thought of, we'll be really, really happy to hear them. Now, deficit reduction. One of the things that Sage said was they wanted us to reduce the deficit. But they wanted to do it. They wanted to do it without crashing the Bermuda economy. I think if you folks want to hear me, do you want to hear? Do you want to hear? Okay, thank you, thank you. The government accepts the recommendation that it requires the development and implementation of a 3-year deficit reduction strategy. And I'm happy to say, and I think many of you already know, that the government has already done that. And because I know you folks want to hear this, right? So, this thing called MTEF, you may have heard of before. It stands for Medium Term Expenditure Framework. And we presented this in the budget in February, where our target is to reduce the deficit by 7% in the first year, which is the year we're in now, to further reduce the deficit by 5% in the second year, and in the third year to reduce the deficit by 3%, 15% over 3 years. So that's the medium-term expenditure framework that we have decided to go ahead with, and that in fact guides a lot of the decisions that we will make insofar as the budget going forward. Now, implementation. It's okay to have these ideas, but somebody's got to make it reality. And we're working very hard on this. We've established working groups to make these ideas reality, as I said. And these working groups, which consist, I have to say, of civil servants, as well as people from outside the civil service, right? They're working together to try to move this process forward. And these working groups will undertake further analysis, consult stakeholders, present options, assess feasibility priorities, and recommend when and how we should deliver. The working group structure. We have a number of working groups. There's one called Public Service Reform and Strategic Planning Committee. There's a Human Resources Working Group. There's the Asset Rationalization Working Group and Digital Services Working Group and Pension and Benefits Working Group. So we do have people here who don't want to listen, they just want to express themselves. And we appreciate people expressing themselves, but I think that Bermudians are always well known around the world for politeness and courtesy. Are we not? And as Bermudians, I think that we should live up to our reputation in that respect. Now, working group structure. Public Service Reform and Strategic Planning Committee and Human Resource Working Group, Asset Rationalization Working Group, Digital Working Group, and Pension and Benefits Working Group. These are... Somebody asked me who's going to be in that last group. They're going to be civil servants, and if anybody wants to volunteer for this group, we're happy to have you. Happy to have you. So, you know, we have a lot of work to do, and the old saying that many hands make light work applies here. So if you want to participate in these working groups to help bring particular points of view to the table, we are very happy to have people who will work with us to help solve this problem. A collaborative approach. Opportunity exists for ongoing collaboration with unions and the private sector, participation in working groups, efficiency and reform authority, non-government union negotiators, and other opportunities. We have the ferry outside. Well, that's nice. That's nice. I think that, ladies and gentlemen, you want to...
Excuse me, everyone. Can we make one point? I think everybody can benefit if we just stayed quiet, let the minister you will all get your opportunities to okay. You can ask your questions. Okay, he's almost finished. We'll open the floor for questions in 2 minutes. Okay, continue on.
Thank you, Malcolm. We're talking about collaboration here. People can get involved. They can participate in working groups. The Efficiency and Reform Authority forces even more participation by non-government members, union negotiators, and there are other opportunities for people to get involved. So that's it. I'll be quite happy to answer your questions.
Okay. Lady back there. Lady right behind.